was kind of bad. She didn't give me anything to introduce her with, so I'm making this up. Martha's from the Montana State Historical Society. She writes books and everything. And she's here to talk about schoolmarms and madams tonight. Unfortunately, she's just an acquaintance of mine. We're going to become friends soon, though, because I really enjoy listening to Martha, so you're going to hear more from her later on. She doesn't know that yet, but... and then, any other announcements? No? And then Maria has one.
Just that there is going to be a little part of this where she's going to ask you for some questions. So if you're going to speak, please raise your hand and wait until I bring you the microphone so that Ron over there isn't stuck not being able to pick up your voices. So there we go. Take it away.
Thank you so much. Everyone can hear me? I'm delighted to be here. I'm sorry, Paulette, that I didn't give you an introduction. I do work at the Montana Historical Society. I'm the program manager of our outreach and education program. And this is probably unfair to do to people on a Friday night, but I thought we'd start with, I don't know, I don't want to call it a test because it's not, but just an assessment of your memory, a wondering about where things are at, what you know. It's not a test, but I gave everyone an index card and a pencil, and I'm wondering if you can write the names of 5 women, Montana women from the 19th century, and 5 Montana women from the 20th century. So, I don't actually expect many of you to be able to do this. I would be shocked if I would be so happy if any of you were able to do this. So just if you can come up with 1, if you can come up with 2, you pass, you get an A+. So just write down however many women that you can think of, but preferably 5 from the 19th century and 5 from the 20th century, Montana women. All right? Do what you can. I'm hoping everyone can come up with at least 1. That's my goal. So if you get even 1, you pass. And absolutely consult with your seatmates. Like, that's fine. But don't Google. That's not fine. Got to set the rules of engagement here. Yeah, it's like trivia. That's what it is. It's not a test. It's a trivia game. That sounds so much more relatable, enjoyable, friendly.
People might expect you to bring beer.
Oh, that would have been good. I could have brought prizes. Why didn't I bring prizes? That would have been so smart. All right. So let me ask, how many people got at least 2 women? Raise your hand if you came up with 2. All right, look at how smart you guys are. If you came up with 2 or 3 around in that number, I'm wondering if someone would be willing to name one of the women that they came up with. So if you're going to be brave and you want to tell me one name that you came up with, that would be great. She's going to bring the mic over.
Jeannette Rankin, of course.
Okay, good. Well, let's just stop there.
Yeah.
So Jeannette Rankin, I thought everyone was going to get 1, and I was hoping, and I thought that might be the one because we're in Missoula. We have the Jeannette Rankin Peace Center. Everyone knows. So did everyone get Jeannette Rankin? All right, look at you guys. All right. And so she was the first woman elected to Congress. She was a suffrage activist and a peace activist, right? All right. So did someone get somebody besides Jeannette Rankin who got 1 or 2 or 3? Go ahead.
Sarah Bickford, as far as the Virginia City Water Company utility, first woman owner of that.
Do people know Sarah Bickford's name? Is that a well-known name? See, I'm impressed and surprised. That's great. Sarah Bickford was born enslaved, and she came out working for a white family as a nanny, basically, to pay her passage to Virginia City during the gold rush. she married a miner, white miner who was terribly abusive. She got a divorce. She had a bakery for a while. She learned how to bake. She got a bakery. She married another white man whose last name was Bickford. And he owned 2/3 of a water company. And when he died, she inherited his 2/3. She bought the partner out. She went to business school, correspondence classes in business, and she ran the Virginia City Water Company and she was certainly the only African-American woman in Montana to own a public utility, possibly in the West, possibly in the United States. So Sarah Bickford is a great one. How about somebody else who had 2 or 3 in that, who didn't have a ton of names, but had just
Dixon, who is a local teacher. Dixon.
Dixon? What's her first name?
Oh, I can't think of it.
Okay.
But they have the Dixon Learning Center, that's named after her.
Oh,
and I
very
can't think of
cool.
her name. And then another one, Nancy Russell.
All right, yes. So Dixon was a local teacher who,
I want to say Ruth, but it's not Ruth.
and was she 20th century or was
No,
she?
No.
She was an early teacher, so
early
we're still in the 19th century mostly, although Sarah Bickford, I think, dies in the 1930s, so gets us up into the 20th century. So a local early teacher, and Nancy Russell, who is Charlie Russell's wife, but more importantly, his business manager. And he would have been an unknown artist, drawing for drinks, if Nancy Russell hadn't taken over the business and marketed him and charged what he called dead man's prices for his work. So that business success is really due to her. Yeah.
Well, this is a madam, I think, Mary Gleam.
Yeah, sure. That's a great Missoula name. You have the Gleam 1 and 2 downtown. She was a madam. She was pretty ruthless. She went to jail for murder and was notorious in Missoula. So, anyone else? So in the 2 or 3, people got 2 or 3, yeah. Do you have somebody else?
How about Trixie McCormick?
Tell me about Trixie McCormick.
Well, she owned the Ovando Saloon in
Okay.
Ovando, Montana, and she
Nice.
was a trick writer. And I went to Smoke Elser's meeting and just learned about her. I knew her, but I didn't know she was a trick writer, and she was with Barnum and Bailey, toured Europe and everything, and she was just a normal Western gal.
That's fabulous.
So-
And was she, since you knew her, she was alive in the second half of the 20th century? Yeah, okay, so we're getting to more recent history. That's great. Anyone else have 2 or 3, yeah, in that early kind of bunch?
In the arts, Myrna Loy and Joan Quick to See.
Mm-hmm. Joan Quick to See Smith is a Salish, right, artist. She's a visual artist. She does really amazing paintings. And of course, Myrna Loy is a movie star and from Helena, right? So yeah, we're very proud of her in Helena and our art center is named after her. So anyone else in that 2 or 3 range? This gentleman right here said yes.
Martha Canary.
Oh, okay, say it again into the mic, yeah.
I say Martha Canary.
Right, better known as?
Calamity Jane.
Calamity Jane, right. So she was kind of a legendary Western figure, a drinker. She grew up very poor, and there's, begging for food in Virginia City before she became kind of a legendary Western, iconic kind of woman.
Governor Judy Martz.
Governor Judy Martz, Montana's first woman governor. Yeah.
Edith Merrilees.
Tell me about Edith Merrilee.
She was a writer who was a mentor and taught John Steinbeck in writing.
And she's from Montana.
Yes, so she went to Stanford, and then she became a professor there, and then he went there and eventually dropped out. But while he was there, she was his teacher, and he really admired her.
Okay,
and
so
they have buildings named after her.
So a California person. But,
No, she's from Montana, but she
Oh.
went to Stanford.
oh, got it. Where did she grow up? Do you know?
I think it was Missoula.
Oh,
I don't
very
remember.
cool.
I used to live in her dorm.
Oh, nice. Okay, so you know about, so some of these people we know, just from the build, like the Gleimbach and the dorm. All right. Anyone else who got like 2 or 3 in that range who had someone they wanted to say? How about someone who got more than 2 or 3?
Oh,
Okay, you had 1. Well, who's your 1 if it hasn't been said?
You may not remember her. Her name is Ann German.
Ann German.
She's an attorney in Libby.
Okay.
And back in the late 70s, she had a lawsuit, which I forget what was after it, that sued both the state of Montana and the United States, but I can't remember what it was about.
Oh, okay. So an attorney who had a big lawsuit,
She's still in practice.
and she's still in practice. All right, excellent. Yes.
Mary Fields
Mary
from
Fields.
St. Pete's Mission.
What? From St. Peter's Mission. Do people know Mary Fields? Another formerly enslaved woman who made her way out to Montana with the Sisters of Providence of Charity, I think, with the nuns, anyway, that came up to St. Peter's. Do you know, was it Sisters of Providence? Or is it, or Sisters of Charity of Leavenworth, or Sisters of Providence? Providence, okay, so with the Sisters of Providence, and she was a gardener, she was an herbalist, well, later, yeah. So when she was at St. Peter's, she worked there, she chopped wood, she gardened, she, worked about, and she was rowdy, and the bishop didn't like her. And so he kicked her out. And that's when she became a stagecoach driver. She was a mail carrier, and she carried the mail from Cascade to St. Peter's. And so became well-known as, again, one of the first African-American letter carriers. There's a rural letter carrier. And she loved baseball, and she sponsored the local baseball team, and she would bring them pansies, so she had a great garden in Cascade. All right. So how about some people who had, 4 or 5, and did anyone have 4 or 5 people? Okay, we got a couple. All right. So if you had 4 or 5 people, you want to give me a name?
Oh.
No, they were over here. The 4 or 5 people.
Julia Gregory was the first woman mayor of Missoula.
All right. I love that I'm learning about a lot of women that I didn't know. Yeah.
Eloise Kohl.
Yes, absolutely. Does everyone know Eloise Kohl? One of my all-time favorite Montana women, late 20th century. She was a Blackfeet banker. She helped found she was an accountant, and she helped found a tribal bank on the Blackfeet reservation. And she noticed that there were people who had trust land, Indian trust land, that the government was supposed to be managing in trust, and maybe there was an oil well on their land, but they were very, very poor. And so they were getting their checks from the government because the government was in charge of leasing their mineral rights or leasing their land for cattle, but they weren't getting what their land was worth. And she became the leader of a class action suit, Kohl versus Salazar. And it was one of the largest settlements. The U.S. government had been stealing money from individual tribal members for decades, including using some of it to bail out, if you remember the Enron scandal, some of the Indian trust money went to bail out Enron, and it was, and so she was the great hero of that, a lawsuit carrying that forward, and the settlement was way smaller than the amount of money that the government sold, but way bigger. It was, I think, the largest settlement up to that date. She also was the president of her local Elvis fan club. She was a huge Elvis fan. And there's a great movie on her it's called 100 Years, and it's really fabulous. It's a wonderful documentary, and everyone should go watch it. And she says that one of her regrets, the only thing that she, about getting, leading up this lawsuit and devoting her life to this cause of justice was that she had to give up being the president of the Elvis fan club. All right, so anyone else who have 4 or 5? Someone here? Yeah.
I was just going to say Maureen Mansfield, who was married to Mike Mansfield.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe someone can help. I was trying to remember the actress that played Lois in Superman back in the 70s. She's from Missoula, and she used to, Margot Kidder just came to me.
Oh, wow.
Margot Kidder is from Missoula.
Oh, that's awesome. I didn't know that. And Maureen Mansfield, again, another wife, kind of like Nancy Russell, but Mike Mansfield said that he wouldn't have gone back to school without her. He wouldn't have become what he was. And when we have a statue of him in the Capitol in Helena, and we wanted to put up a statue, and he said, only if you include Maureen, because she was that instrumental to my career and what I did. All right. Anyone get more than 5? This gentleman got more than 5. You tell me, we're going to bring up the mic. Tell me someone who hasn't been mentioned.
Kim Williams, who was a prominent person in Missoula, on the radio and so on, and we have a trail named after her.
Oh, okay.
Kim Williams Trail. Ann Morrow Lindbergh,
A Montanan?
well, she lived here.
I didn't know she lived here.
She's got a son that still lives here,
Oh, wow.
Lan Lindbergh.
Okay.
And Onyx Smith, which is a friend of ours, neighbor for years.
Onyx Smith is a famous writer, or a well-known writer, yeah.
Helen Boley, she was quite prominent in the Missoula area.
Yeah.
Her husband was a professor at the university and was very active in many things in Missoula.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. So usually by this time in this talk, someone, and I'm really pretty disappointed that no one said, and maybe it's because, is anyone born in Montana? Anyone have grandparents who are born in Montana? So usually by the time, sometimes someone has said my grandma. And well, let me just back up and say that when I started this project with the Montana Historical Society to commemorate the 100th anniversary of non-Native women's suffrage in Montana. So non-Native women fought and received the right to vote 6 years earlier than the National Suffrage Amendment was passed, so in 2014. And I say non-Native because, not 2014, in 1914. I say non-Native because the Indian Citizenship Act passes in 1924. There were some Indian women who could vote before 1924. About 40% of American Indians in Montana could vote before 1924, and there's a whole bunch of ways that you got that right to vote before the Citizenship Act, one of which was women's citizenship followed their husbands. So if a Native woman married a white man or a non-Native man, then she became automatically a citizen. Equally, if an American woman married a non-citizen, so say I was living in Butte and I was born in Butte, but I married an immigrant from Ireland, I would lose my citizenship. So, some women could, some not Native women could, but until 1924. Anyway, we started this project, and when I would do that, you guys really, it was such a joy because people maybe named Jeannette Rankin, well, everyone named Jeannette Rankin, but then we'd get Sacagawea sometimes, and we'd get Evelyn Cameron, and I think that might be Western versus Eastern Montana. Evelyn Cameron is a photographer from England originally that came out and photographed in the Terry era during the Homestead period. So a lot of times people, Helena to the east would say Evelyn Cameron. But there's been so much work done since then. So now we have Sarah Bickford and Mary Fields being mentioned. Some of the work was things that we did. We created the Montana Women's History website that has all the essays from the book, and we published the book Beyond Schoolmarms and Madams. And all the essays in Beyond Schoolmarms and Madams are on our website, plus 130 plus essay articles that have been published in Montana, the Magazine of Western History. So if anyone wants to read more, we created a Montana Women's History Facebook page that has profiles on it. But it hasn't just been us. People like Beth Judy from Missoula did a young adults book called Bold Women in Montana History. Marga Lincoln included a number of my favorite women in her book, Montana Grit. There's been some films. A film came out that featured a bunch of Montana women, a documentary fairly recently, and they're on part 2. And so that's great. So anyway, we've become a long way. And as I said, the other thing that would usually happen in my talk, like I said, was someone would say, my grandma. And the reason I really like to hear that is because part of my goal has always been to expand our definition of who are the people who make history. And when you expand the definition of who makes history, you write women into the story. So when people can't name 10 Montana women, part of the problem is they're trying to think of famous political figures. And we have Judy Martz, but we, and we do have others, and we have Jeannette Rankin. But that's a really narrow way to look at history, and if you're just going to look at famous political people, you're mostly going to look at men, right? So really, my argument for you today, the one thing I want you to come away is history is this intersection between ordinary people's lives and large historical events. So does anyone remember the phrase, the personal is political? Does that sound familiar to anyone? That was a feminist mantra from the 70s, right? Well, history, the personal is also historical, is what I want to tell you. And because it's this intersection between ordinary people's lives and large historical events, then the women who lived through Salish removal from the Bitterroot lived history and are historical figures. So you're looking at, the push-pull factors that brought thousands of immigrants to Montana, including all of those women, including these women from the Finnish Ladies Band in Red Lodge. Right? You're looking at the Homestead Act and the fact that the U.S. allowed solo women, so single and divorced women, to homestead, where Canada didn't. Canada only allowed widowed women to homestead, so you couldn't be single. And so women came down from Canada, and you have about 19% of women homesteaders, 19% of homesteaders in Montana were single women. So I'm just, actually, she asked me, that lovely woman, and I told her there wasn't. Oh, you're still here, right, with your mic? I'm just wondering if people would want to name like a few other large events that might have impacted Montana women's lives. Anyone have a large, or I can just repeat it too. A large event that might have impacted women or men. Yeah.
The flu of 19...
The 1918 flu, absolutely. And so the women who nursed other people in the flu, the women who lost children in that flu, the women who died in that flu, those are all women who participated in history. What other kind of large events can you think of?
Famine ships from like Ireland coming over?
So like the Irish famine, or did you say? Yeah, sure. That was kind of earlier than Montana, but you did get waves and waves of Irish women. And actually the Irish women, Ireland was one of the few countries where you had a lot of single women migrating. And so you have quite a number of unmarried Irish women coming to Montana in the late 1800s. How about, something like war? We have World War I and World War II affected women who enlisted, of course, but also affected women on the home front. Some of the women who stayed home and supported the war effort, and some of them who didn't. So I'm going to take a couple of detours here. I knew about Rosie the Riveter. Is Rosie the Riveter something that you all know about from World War II, right? We can do it. And so that was a group of women that I knew about, women who went in and worked in factories during World War II. But what I didn't know is that women also took non-traditional jobs during World War I, including these engine wipers here. This is a woman who was working for the Great Northern in Great Falls. In Livingston, there were about 24 women who took jobs as engine wipers and yard workers for the NP, greasing down the wheels, operating the turntables, wiping down the engines. And because railroad workers were unionized, they were paid the same wage as men, which was not the law. Now it's the law that you can't have women doing the same job as men and get paid less, right? But then it wasn't the law. It happened all the time. Women teachers were paid less than men for the same job. But the union insisted on equal wages. And then we have Jeannette Smith here from Sale, Montana. World War I was pretty unpopular before it broke out in Montana. We had a lot of immigrants here. We had a lot of immigrants from countries that didn't support the war, like Ireland, didn't want to join up on the side of the English, who they saw as their oppressors. There was a lot of immigrants from Austria, Hungary, Germany, a lot of Germans. There was a lot of radicals, members, like a lot of Finnish immigrants who came with a radical socialist tradition, a lot of members of the Industrial Workers of the World Union who really saw, and they talked about the war as rich man's war, poor man's fight. So you're just going to send us for cannon fodder so you make a lot of money. And so there's a lot of anti-war sentiment in Montana and nationally, actually. And so the US government put forth this huge campaign to propaganda campaign to gin up patriotism. And in Montana, we passed a law that was the Montana Sedition Act that made it illegal to criticize the president, to criticize the war, to criticize the Red Cross, to speak in any way against the war. And Jeannette Smith, who lived in Sale, she was the postmistress of Sale in Powder River country, way over east by Wyoming, and she and her husband ranched out there. And they were both arrested for violating the Montana Sedition Act. The Montana Sedition Act, by the way, became the model later for the National Sedition Act. So anyway, she said that she refused to support the Red Cross, and she made some statements against World War I, and she got 5 to 10 years. She was sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison. He got 10 to 20, and a $20,000 fine, which was collected by selling off their land. They both served about 2 years, and at the time she was one of the only 2 women incarcerated in Deer Lodge. So as you can see, this way of looking at history, as seeing it as the lives of ordinary people that intersect with large political, social, or economic events, is a way to write in women. It's often called social history. And I'd argue that it's more interesting to many people than a top-down political history. It's certainly more interesting to me. And it's a way that allows for women's experience. So when we're talking in this way about history, if this is how we're framing history, we can include topics like housework. Can anyone want to take a guess on what these items are on the screen? Yeah. A rug beater, you think, maybe? Okay. Any other guesses? It's actually a pot scrubber and a potato masher. You're deceived because of the size. There's no scale here. So if I put a ruler up, you probably would have gotten that. Housework, when we think of housework historically, some of the questions we can ask are, what has changed? Who did the work, and how important it was, this unpaid labor. Jewel Peterson homesteaded up on the High Line, and she recalled about, or she grew up on the High Line on a farm. She recalled about her homesteading parents. She said, a man just couldn't work out in the field all day and then come in and start the beans boiling. And when you realize that washing clothes was almost a 2-day operation, In the wintertime, you melted the snow first before you even started. And that was a day and a half. So it was a really difficult thing for a man to be a bachelor alone. So think about the value, the economic value of domestic labor. And it remains really valuable, and it's always been terribly, terribly undervalued. Household production, which you can consider cooking, cleaning, caring for children, shopping, gardening, doing odd jobs. A 2012 article in Survey of Current Business estimated that this type of unpaid domestic work represent, if it were included in the gross domestic product, would raise the level of the GDP 39% in 1965 and 25.7% in 2010. Okay? That's huge, right? And we just don't think about it. I looked it up before I came, and the Bureau of Economic Analysis of the U.S. Department of Congress valued household production at $5,316.8 million in 2020. So that's housework. Montana territory also saw a lot of business owners. You could escape prejudice rehiring by owning your own business, so you didn't have to convince a man to hire you. It allowed you to take care of children, so it's something that you could often do from home, and there wasn't, good child care systems. And especially on the mining frontier, women's traditional skills were particularly valuable. So the 1870 census reported that of 20,595 non-Indian people in the territory, 16,771 were men in Montana territory. That means there's about 4 men for every woman in 1870 in Montana territory, which means that women could easily make money using their traditional skills by running lodging houses, cooking, cleaning, baking, sewing, washing, entertaining, whether as hurdy-gurdy girls who you paid to dance with you, or as sex workers. The advertisement here on the right is probably the first black women-owned business in Montana, and then on the left is Sarah Bickford, who we already talked about. Of course, women also participated in wage work. Some worked in traditionally female jobs, like telephone operators, for example. But when they had the opportunity, they happily branched out. And I talked a little about those, and I'll just say a little bit about the telephone operator here. The only thing we know about her is her first name was Helen, and she worked at the Many Glacier Hotel in Glacier in 1925. She was on Scoppy Picunny or Blackfeet, and the concessionaires often required their Blackfeet employees to dress in traditional clothing as a treat for Eastern tourists. So she was the telephone operator at the hotel. So we already talked about those engine wipers during World War I, but during World War II, there were a lot more women, Rosies, including women who went into the smelters in Anaconda and in Great Falls. And Ursula Jurczyk, who was one of the women who went to work in Anaconda smelter, said that the work wasn't really any more strenuous than housework. And Dorothy Anderson, who got a job moving anodes in Black Eagle smelter, and I just love her quote. She said, "I used to think that it would be a hard job out there. These men that go out there and work all day, they have to be coddled and everything else at night because they're so tired because they worked all day. Heck, I wasn't tired when I came home from doing that job." So we also had professional women in Montana. One of my all-time favorite women is this woman on the left. Her name is Harriet Cushman. And she graduated from Cornell University in 1914 with a degree in bacteriology and chemistry. And in 1918, she earned her poultry specialist degree from Rutgers University in New Jersey, and she became one of the few women pursuing a career as a poultry specialist. She was hired in 1922 by the Extension Service at MSU. in Bozeman. And she worked there nearly 30 years. And she was quite remarkable. She traveled the state, educating farmers on breeding, culling, egg and bird grading, poultry housing, proper feed, all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that is most remarkable about her to me was that she formed one of the first egg and turkey wholesale cooperatives. And this saved a lot of Montanans' farms during the Great Depression. So the Great Depression, we have drought, right? And what else do we have? We have grasshoppers. Well, you're not growing crops in drought and grasshoppers, but what eat grasshoppers? Turkeys, right? So she secured these national markets for Montanans' premium quality Norbest turkeys. And it was the most profitable in the nation during the Great Depression. And she also wrote these wonderful letters back to her parents describing her work. So here's one from 1933, and she's writing from Columbus, Montana. And she said, "This has been one of the wildest weeks that has ever happened in my life. When I crossed the tracks, I saw the line stringing back 4 or 5 blocks to the Yellowstone River Bridge. It took her and her assistant 12 hours to grade and pack the 60,000 pounds of turkey. By noon the next day, the temperatures in the railroad cars were rapidly rising, and she still had more birds waiting for her in Laurel and Roberts. She said, I just wanted to sit right down and cry. Instead, she solicited help from the railroad crew to cool down the cars. Working around the clock, she and her assistants graded and packed 5 train cars of over 140,000 pounds of turkey. We were really shaking when the switch engine man came in. He called the yards, hold the fast fruit express and have the icing crew ready to get this poultry car out in a hurry. So that was the kind of work that she did. She was also a poet and a great supporter of American Indian education, and left a bunch of her estate to the Native American Studies Department at MSU. Women also work in more traditional female fields, like being librarians and in healthcare. And here I'm representing them with State Librarian Alma Jacobs of Great Falls, who grew up who was a librarian in she's a librarian in Great Falls first, and then she became state librarian, and Butte Dr. Carolyn McGill. Carolyn McGill was really instrumental not only in her practice. She starts to work in 1914, coming to Butte from Johns Hopkins, where she got her medical degree, but instrumental in establishing the tuberculosis hospital in Montana. And tuberculosis was a terrible, terrible problem in Montana, particularly on Indian reservations, which this tuberculosis hospital didn't help because I think it was white only, but also in the mines. And it was called Miners' Con. And you go down in these damp mines, and a lot of men. Butte was one of the monikers for Butte. We all know it as the richest hill on earth. We might know it as the Gibraltar of unionism. It was also the city of widows and orphans because men died so young in Butte. So that tuberculosis hospital was really important. We had more women as nurses, of course, in Montana than as doctors, but a surprising number of women doctors at the turn of the century, including Mariah Dean in Helena and Sadie Lindbergh in Miles City. And Sadie Lindbergh was known both for her care in delivering babies, but also for her willingness to provide abortions to women who needed them, even though they were illegal. Women were also really important in establishing hospitals. The Sisters of Charity of Leavenworth, the Presentation Sisters, and Sisters of Providence, all were orders that founded hospitals. Sisters of Providence here founded St. Patrick's in 1873. And then the Protestants didn't like the Catholics getting all the credit, and so they created the deaconesses, and they started setting up rival hospitals. So the Rosebud County Hospital and Benefice in Great Falls were both founded by deaconesses. Charity work is another type of unpaid labor that our communities really depended on. And this, of course, included church work. the minister of the First Presbyterian Church in Bozeman was talking about how they were able to raise the funds to build their church. And he said, subscriptions were contributed to construct the church, but ice cream and strawberries did the rest. And I'll give you one guess as to who was cutting up those strawberries, who was churning that ice cream, and who was serving it. Right? It was the church women. There were also community builders. Churches were one type of community institution, but women's clubs worked to found libraries. About 75% of the libraries, it's estimated in Montana, were founded by women. They worked to improve community health, to provide services for children. They engaged in beautification projects. They founded orphanages and schools and other institutions. So that was all women, that was all really considered women's work at the turn of the century. They also, some of these women moved from being kind of community builder, charity workers, to being political activists. So there was a movement at the turn of the century called social housekeeping. It was this argument that for particularly middle-class women, so farm women were working. Rural women have always, worked as part of the collective enterprise. And working-class women were also often working, taking in boarders, for example, to supplement the family income. So a lot of the work was done at home, taking in laundry, taking in boarders, maybe a penny store, that kind of thing. But middle-class women at this particular period were not expected to work once they got married. And so they started women's clubs, and they came up with this idea of social housekeeping. The idea is we're in charge as women of taking care of the home and taking care of our children and our family. That's our job. But we can't take care of our children properly if the milk that is coming in has disease in it. So we can't take care of our children properly if they're walking by and seeing prostitutes. We can't take care of our children properly if men are getting drunk and drinking up wages. So whatever their cause was, they kind of saw this idea that we can't take care of our children properly if we don't have good parks for them to play at, right? We can't take care of our children properly if they're not libraries, if the schools aren't good. So it was a way of women expanding their sphere from this domestic sphere where everyone agreed they were supposed to be, and they were saying, this domestic sphere is really big, right? And so that became these community builders, and then some of them moved on to become, much more active. And that was sort of and active in the suffrage movement, for example, and fighting for the right to vote, because they realized that to really do our job, we need to have influence over policy and public and politics. Some of these activists that I chose, we already talked about Eloise Kohl, who I love, who's much later than that period that I talked. And just by the way, the case was settled for $3.5 billion in 2009, so I didn't have the number there. Sister Providencia Tolan was a nun, and a lot of amazing work in Montana was done by religious women. And she worked very hard in Great Falls. Great Falls had an area called Hill 57, where now the Little Shell have their headquarters and are now recognized by the US government as well as by the state of Montana as a sovereign nation, but they were not unrecognized until very recently, and lived without land and in poverty, many of them in Great Falls. And she worked very hard for the Little Shell in Great Falls, set up classes, solicited donations for food and clothing, but also did a lot of lobbying of Congress to change federal Indian policy. For example, and was a really harsh critic of relocation, which was an Indian policy in the 1950s that had kind of dire consequences. And she had the ear of Senators Mike Mansfield, so kind of an activist in that way. And Belle Wiseman is just one of my favorites. She's shown here with her husband at a 1970s at an ERA rally, but she campaigned for women's suffrage in 1910. She spoke on the streets, standing on a soapbox. She was outside of bars. She was maybe all of 5 foot. She's a very small woman. She ran for office in 1932 to be a state senator, and her motto, her campaign slogan was "Smaller but better senators." So, some were more successful than she. She did not win. She was very disappointed that she didn't win. And one of the reasons that she didn't win in the 30s was because people thought, well, the position of state senator should go to a man who needs the income, and she did not. But there were women who were successfully ran for public office. Maggie Hathaway was one of the first 2 women elected to the Montana legislature in 1917, so the same year that Jeannette Rankin was elected to, or elected in 16, but starting to serve in 17. So women's suffrage passes in 1914, that very first election that women can vote. Montana women and some men send Jeannette Rankin to Congress, but they send Maggie Smith Hathaway and Emma Ingalls to the legislature. Hathaway was a Democrat, Ingalls was a Republican. Hathaway was from Ravalli County, and Ingalls was up in Flathead County. Hathaway campaigned, she traveled just as many miles as Jeannette Rankin did. She was a strong advocate for prohibition, which passes in Montana earlier than it passes nationally. Again, she drafted the Montana Mother's Pension Bill, which allowed women compensation when their spouses failed to support them and their children. She fought to create a child welfare division of state government. She won the 8-hour workday for women, and during World War I, she employed women only on her manless ranch so that more men could join the service. Ingalls founded the Kalispell Interlake with her husband, and she used it to editorialize for civic reform. And a rival editor said she was a clever and interesting writer who occasionally wielded a caustic pen. She was a pioneer homesteader, the first to irrigate in the Flathead Valley, and she managed by herself after her husband's health failed. And she introduced the National Suffrage Amendment when it came before the Montana House for ratification. And she also sponsored the bill establishing the Mountain View Vocational School for Girls. So that was a reform school. So they felt very strongly that girls, delinquent girls, as they called them, shouldn't go to Miles City where the boys were anymore, that was a recipe for disaster and abuse, and so they created a separate school for girls. Dolly Akers, who's here on the bottom, she was Nakota or Assiniboine from Fort Peck, and she was elected as a Republican legislator in 1932. She was also the first woman elected to the Fort Peck Tribal Council, and she served as tribal chair. So that's her, and then we have the 19 female delegates to the 1972 Constitutional Convention, and I think the women's work, so that there was 100 delegates that wrote the 1972 Constitution, which is one of the most beautiful constitutions. We are so lucky here in Montana to have this document. And these 19 women were instrumental, and one of the things they got into the Constitution was basically the Equal Rights Amendment. So the Equal Rights Amendment, even though it didn't pass nationally, was written into the Montana Constitution. Also things like the right to privacy and the right to a clean and healthful environment. And the clean and healthful clause that has been in the news a lot lately, you know, with the case of those kids that sued, that was really championed by some men, including a man who lived in Missoula whose name I'm blocking on, Bob Campbell. But also Louise Cross was a huge advocate from out in Glendive, and she was very active in the Northern Plains Resource Council against strip mining all of eastern Montana for coal plants, the coal. And so she was a huge environmental advocate that really pushed forward that clean and healthful clause. Also, Maynann Ellingson, who's also from Missoula and is still around, was very active in that. So politicians, but also, you know, Montana women were athletes. They were creators of beauty. We already talked about them being soldiers and home front stalwarts, but it bears saying again. And preservers of culture. So I don't know, I will, in most families, it's the women that pass down the family recipes. It's the women that write the Christmas cards that are sent out to connect families to one another, right? It's the women that pass down stories. Now, not all the time. There are men that write Christmas cards and men that tell family history and preserve that. But a lot of time, historically, particularly, that work has fallen to women. Here we have Oshani Kenmill, who was born in 1916. She was a Salish woman who repeatedly fled boarding school, and she started beading at age 11. And then after her husband died, she supported herself with brain tanning and beading. And my husband actually was lucky enough to go to a workshop that she gave on brain tanning. And someone asked, how do you know how much brain to use? And she said, God gave every animal enough brains to tan its own hide. So. Her artistry was recognized by the National Endowment of the Arts, and she taught, like I said, tanning and beading at Salish Kootenai College for 20 years to pass on those traditions. And then you had groups like the Daughters of Norway, right, that were, making the lefse and the lutefisk for celebrations that the Sons of Norway were hosting. And so we had women who embraced modernity. So women weren't all traditionalists, and I just love this. This slide is basically because I really like these pictures of young flappers in front of cars with their boyfriends in Butte. So, and also, of course, although so much more, we have schoolmarms and madams. So that is kind of a quick overview of a couple hundred years of Montana history, and particularly through the eyes of women. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Or hear your comments.
Hi. So the Stonewall riots of 69 into 70, all of that, I know that Stonewall Lane in Stevensville was a retreat area for a lot of lesbian, LGBTQ plus queer women of that time. So I was kind of wondering, a lot of this is heteronormative structured women that we see a lot of, but what did this look like for queer women and LGBTQ women of this time? Trans women, do we have a big history on that? Or I understand that it's more modern. A lot of these things are unfolding right now, so.
So we do know some of that history through arrest records, for example. Yeah. So there was a woman that was arrested in Butte for cross-dressing. She was, she had a wife, or maybe he. She was arrested because she was gendered female, but she presented male, had married. And so we know that story. That's a harder history to tell when you're looking back. For sure, there were lesbians in Montana always. We know, but it's harder to get that history documented. So arrest records are one way, or court trials are one way we have that history. You have a tradition of two-spirit women among a lot of tribes. So a very famous woman woman warrior who was Kootenai, who presented, sometimes she was a woman, sometimes she was a man, or he was a man, went on war parties, took a wife, got kicked out of fur trade camp for drinking too much, was kind of a rowdy character that David Thompson documented in his diaries. So we have people like that. Also that we know about kind of historically. So there's some of that history that's been done. More needs to be done. Of course, in the 70s and 80s, we do have a fair number of lesbians participating in the Back to the Land movement. So Basin, Montana became the Montana Artist Refuge, and it was basically founded by lesbian artists who, some of them went to Portland, and then it's like, well, no, we can make this in Basin, and it became a center for art and culture. And there's still some women there. MJ Williams is one of them, who's an amazing horn player. I mean, really amazing musician, but kind of known as an art center. Alex Swaney, too, was a poet who lived there. So that was a movement that was happening. We know, you know, kind of in the more recent history, again, there are women like Diane Sands, who was a lesbian legislator. Her partner was also a legislator, but not out when she was a legislator. Diane was an out woman. Christine Kaufman also served in the legislature. So you have that activism that's happening as well. There is on the Montana History Portal a small oral history project that's Voices of Gay and Lesbian Butte or something like that, and it's oral history. But those are from the 1980s, I think, or 90s, so more recent histories than going back. Is that helpful? Yeah. Other questions or comments?
I have the mic. Anybody? I just wanted to say that you guys keep pronouncing Mary, our madam here in Missoula, Mary Gleam.
Oh, is it wrong?
But in the newspapers, and I've done a lot of local newspaper research, she was called Mary Glime because it rhymes with slime.
Ah, all right, so Gleim.
Just a little madam info there.
Excellent.
Anyone else?
Well, thank you for coming. I hope it was fun.
Thank you, Martha.